Hey, what's happening, everybody? My name is Dev. I've been a serious guitarist for over 3.5 decades. Today's video is going to be all about modal interchange for lead playing. This is the last video in this autumn of modes that I've been doing, and I'm super excited to finally be here. But before we get into it, let's make sure that we're all on the same page about a few things. So at its core, a key is really just a set of 7 notes. That's all it is. So if we're in the key of like A major and F sharp minor, which are relative keys, we've got the notes A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, and G sharp. And if we take each of those notes and use them as the root of a chord, we can take the note itself, skip over a note, take that next note, skip over another note, take the next one, and we've got the basic triad for that particular chord inside of this key. Now that'll tell us which ones are major and minor. We're going to have one diminished for our 7. But if we then don't just use the notes each individually as the root of each of these chords, but we also use them as the root of all of the notes in the key as if it's played as a scale, then we can start using those as modes. And I'm going to say diatonic a lot in this, like I have in the previous videos. What that means is that we're staying specifically within the chords and the notes that are in the prescribed key. So we're not going to step outside of them if we're playing diatonically. But the whole concept of modal interchange, that we can take a mode from a different key and use it on top of the chords in this specific key or in this specific instance, and from there we can get a lot of really cool and interesting color. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, check out some of the earlier videos in this, but let's get to the guitar and get jammed. So let's start with something simple. This is a G5, G sharp 5. And I can play pretty much anything on top of this. Just about any mode will work. There's not much information, it's just the root and the 5th. Everything other than the Locrian will work. Let's try a couple of those here. We'll do the relative major. Let's try the relative minor. And let's try something else like the Dorian. Maybe the mixed Lydian. Basics of modal interchange is just trying different modes on top of a single chord, and I try to use modes where the chord tones are inside of the mode itself. In this case, there's not a lot of information, so it's just the G sharp and the D sharp. Let's add a second chord into this riff. Now this has a G sharp, an E, and a D sharp. Now that kind of implies E major 7, which is a chord that has all of those notes in it. So if I put my G sharp and my E major 7 together, I've got a couple options here to find the diatonic actual key. It could be G sharp minor, it could be G sharp Phrygian, either of those will work. Current context. I kind of have control over how that feels and sounds as a lead player, or the other me does. Now let's add a third note, a third chord here. This is an A5. It's just A and E. If I put those notes together with the other ones that I already have, I'm going to end up with enough sonic information to understand that this is probably in G sharp Phrygian. So now that I've got that much information, I kind of have my diatonic figured out. Like the mode, or all the modes for this given key will work. So now I can start playing with modal interchange too. On top of these 5th chords, I can play really kind of any mode, but on top of this E major 7, I'm going to stick to modes that have those 3 notes in it. The E, the D sharp, and the G sharp. So let's give a couple, let's do a couple experiments here and see what happens. Start with the diatonic. So a basic implementation of modal interchange for me kind of looks like the following. First, I try to figure out what is the diatonic key. As you saw previously, I first tried to figure out, so it looks like this is in G Phrygian, which would include E Ionian and C sharp Aeolian, so that's the key of E major and C sharp minor. Once I figure that out, I've got my map of the basic chords and the basic modes, and then I will look at any chord that's being played. So for instance, in the previous one, there was an A5. So that's an A note, and anything that has a 5 in it, I can try any of those. I had an E major 7, so any chords, or I had an E major 7, so any mode that has a major 7, especially they'll also have major thirds, I'll be able to use those and switch them in and out. So this chart, there's an earlier version of it in my modes equals moods videos. I would check that out if this looks new or more interesting to you. I explain it a little bit more in depth there. But here it's a little bit more improved. The majors have green boxes, the minors have red, and the lone diminished has purple. And you can see everything has a root and a 5 except for the diminished. All the minor chords have a minor third in the red. All the major chords have a major third in the green here. The diminished has a minor third as well. And then it's really a matter of what are the sevenths and the fourths and the seconds. There's only 2 that have a flat second, and there's only 2 that have a major 7. So if you're dealing with those intervals, sometimes it's pretty restrictive if you're going to stay inside of the diatonic modes. But that's the basic method, basic implementation that I use. I will try to figure out what is the dominant key, relative major and minor, and then that'll figure out the rest of the diatonic modes for me. And then whenever I go to a chord, I first try to figure out if it's even a chord, if it has a root and a fifth. There's a lot of options, and then the majors and minors, and I just try to match up the sevenths and seconds and fourths and sixths. Let's take a look at that on the guitar. All right, I would like to reiterate that if you're not solid with the modes yet, go watch the earlier videos in the Autumn of Modes. That'll help make a lot of this make sense if it doesn't. But we're going to start with a really simple 3-chord progression. I'm even playing 5th chords here to keep it really simple. And just really straightforward 3-chord progression. We'll start with a B5, and then a G5, and then a D5. So off the bat, I would think that this is in the key of B minor and D major. And this is what a lead would sound like using that as our bass, our diatonic. And since I'm using just 5th chords, it gives me a lot of options for modal interchange. If we take a look at all of our modes, every one other than the Locrian has a root and a 5th. So I can at least try to use all the other modes on each of these chords because they'll contain both the chord tones. Let's see what happens. Start playing full chords. So here's a B minor, G major, and a D major. Not just the 5th chords. Now I'm going to try to play the minor modes on top of the minor chord and the majors on top of the major. Introduce some sevenths here. B minor 7, G major 7, and D major 7. So that limits my options even more if I'm going to stick with the chord tones. Let's see how that sounds. complex with my chords and do like a B minor 6, and a G major 9, and a D major 9. Even further limiting the chords that I could play, the modes. So the idea here is, the more complex you get with your chord voicings, the fewer options you have in terms of keeping the chord tones in the mode. You have fewer options with your modal interchange. So one of the things we can do here is we can introduce some variety in the with modal interchange, kind of at the structural songwriting level. In the last video, I talked about replacing the Lydian with the Dorian, and this G chord, this G major 9, is the Lydian in the diatonic. So let's try switching that out with the Dorian for minor 9. That adds some color and some flavor. Now, I would call this more of a songwriting use of modal interchange than a lead use of modal interchange, because here the song structure is kind of dictating the modal interchange, the change to a different mode. But it's still a great way to introduce some variety. And we can even move back and forth between this and the diatonic the next time for some variety. Whenever we want to open things up for the lead player, we can just go back to fifths whenever we would like. So something that's been repeated is everything other than the diminished, or everything other than the Locrian, which is our 7th mode. It's based on a diminished chord, which is why it looks different here. It's the house at the top of the cliff that's probably haunted. Something's different about it. Everything else has a perfect 5th in it. The Locrian has a flat 5th, which makes it very difficult to do modal interchange with other modes. However, the Lydian also has a sharp 4th, which is the same as a flat 5th in terms of its interval from the root. So if you've got a groove that maybe only has these 2 notes or very heavily focuses on it, it might give you kind of a Primus, Incubus, Korn kind of feel a little bit. But you can choose whether you want it to sound more diminished or weird and major on top of that by using either the Locrian or the Lydian. We'll start with the Locrian here and see how it feels. So that was diatonic Locrian. Let's try Lydian next. It's going to have a very different feel because it's going to be major, but it'll have that same interval in it. Now another option we've got is to substitute the diminished 7th arpeggio for the Locrian. I love this sound. I did a whole video on it before. Check that out sometime. That was a little bit outside of the diatonic, a single note, but let's go way outside of the diatonic here and use a substitution that works kind of only in this situation. I'm going to be playing the 1, the 4, and the 5, so just the major chords, and I'm going to substitute the Dorian for the 1 the whole way through. And specifically the Dorian Blues, which is going to have that flat fifth in it. It'll sound like this. So another one that I really love, I call it the Navarro scale, and it's also known as the Aeolian dominant. So it's the minor scale, but with a major third. If we play that on top of a repetitive minor or Aeolian bass line, we can get some really interesting sounds. Nothing else really sounds like this. I love the way that sounds. It really invokes the Jane's Addiction feel. And just consider if I was playing the regular Aeolian on top of that, the regular minor scale, how much more that would have sounded like Tool than like Jane's Addiction. So that's it. That concludes the Autumn of Modes. This is Kyo. He wanted to be on camera here. He just did not want to be put down, so he gets to be in on the outro of this entire season. In a lot of ways, it was a huge kind of a dream come true to be able to put this video and all the videos out there this entire season. I really am trying to make the videos that I wish existed when I was learning to play. If you find that would be helpful for you, make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss out on anything. Season 2 is coming up soon. We're going to take a couple weeks off for the holidays here at the end of the year, but Season 2 is going to be the Winter Woodshed, and I cannot wait to unleash it. I've learned so much about how to do this stuff, and the quality is just going to go through the roof. So I hope you all stick around. Stay warm out there, and I'll see you soon. Cheers.